It was a regular Wednesday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I sat on the couch, flipping through the mail like I'd done countless times before. That's when I saw it, a letter from the lab. The DNA test I never thought I'd need was suddenly right in front of me. My hands trembled as I tore it open, and the words on the page blurred. One sentence stood out: 99.9% chance you are not the biological father. I stared at the letter, my mind spinning. How had I ended up here? 20 years of raising my son, watching him grow, guiding him, loving him unconditionally, and now this. I thought back to the day he was born. It was the happiest day of my life. I held him for the first time and vowed to protect him, to always be there for him. From sleepless nights to scraped knees, from birthday parties to father-son talks, I was his dad in every sense of the word. Looking at him, I always saw pieces of myself. The way he smiled, the way his brow furrowed when he was frustrated. He wasn't just my son, he was a part of me, or so I thought. But the truth had been sitting there all along, hidden by the one person I trusted most, my wife. For years, I believed we were a team, navigating the ups and downs of life together. I never imagined she'd keep something this big from me. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family. 6 months ago, things started to feel off. My son was getting ready for college, and we were excited about his acceptance to a prestigious university. But when we started working on his paperwork, my wife became strangely protective of certain documents. One night, she outright refused to show me his birth certificate, claiming it was misplaced. Her reaction didn't sit right with me, but I brushed it off until the cracks grew too big to ignore. Then came the anonymous message: "He's not your son. Ask her about it." Those words sent my heart plummeting. I confronted her, expecting her to deny it, to laugh it off. But she didn't. Her silence spoke louder than any words. In an instant, my world crumbled. 20 years of love, trust, and fatherhood reduced to a single devastating truth. After her silence confirmed my worst fears, I pressed my wife for answers. She admitted everything. She told me that early in our marriage, she'd had a brief fling with an old friend. When she found out she was pregnant, she decided to bury the truth. She convinced herself it didn't matter. After all, I was a good man, a loving husband, and I'd make a great father. So she lied over and over for 20 years. Hearing her confession felt like a knife to my chest. I couldn't process it. Every memory, every moment I'd shared with my son suddenly felt tainted. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. But my anger wasn't for him. It was for her. She'd stolen something irreplaceable from me: the truth. In the days that followed, I tried to function, but I couldn't. I kept replaying everything in my head, questioning how I had missed the signs. My son's teenage years, the small differences I couldn't explain, the little moments when something felt off. All of it came rushing back. But none of it prepared me for the hardest part: telling my son. I had the DNA test done because I needed clarity, even though deep down, I already knew the answer. The results came back, cold and final. I wasn't his biological father. Holding that paper in my hands, I felt like the ground beneath me had given way. But something else became clear too. Biology didn't change the bond we'd built. He was still my son. Telling him the truth was the hardest conversation of my life. We sat down in the living room, the same place we'd shared countless laughs and talks. I told him everything: the affair, the test, the results. I tried to keep my composure, but my voice cracked. I couldn't bear to see the hurt in his eyes. He sat there, quiet for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget: "You've always been my dad. That's not going to change." I broke down in that moment. After everything, he didn't blame me, didn't pull away. If anything, he reassured me. Meanwhile, my wife, no, my ex-wife, became a stranger. The woman I'd spent decades with was suddenly unrecognizable. We started divorce proceedings almost immediately. There was no going back from this. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years of deceit. She'd stolen my chance to make my own choices, to know the truth. Despite the pain, my son and I grew closer in the weeks that followed. We had long talks, not just about what had happened, but about everything: his dreams, his worries, the future. He told me he felt guilty, like this was somehow his fault. I told him the truth. None of it was on him. He was as much a victim as I was, caught in a lie he didn't ask for. And while our relationship wasn't perfect, how could it be after this? We were determined to rebuild. He'd been my son for 20 years, and nothing, not even a DNA test, could take that away. At the same time, I wrestled with my feelings about my ex-wife. There were days when I hated her, days when I missed the version of her I thought I knew, and days when I just felt empty. People kept asking me how I was holding up, and honestly, I didn't have an answer. Some days, I wasn't sure I was holding up at all. The hardest part was grappling with the memories. Every family photo, every milestone, every moment of joy now carried a bitter edge. I couldn't look at them the same way, knowing they were built on a foundation of lies. But through all of this, one thing remained steady: my love for my son. I realized that fatherhood isn't about DNA. It's about showing up day after day and giving your all. It's in the late-night talks, the rides to soccer practice, the advice you give, and the love you share. By the time my son left for college, things were beginning to settle. We'd found a rhythm, a way to move forward. Our bond was different now, more honest, maybe even stronger. He still called me Dad, and every time he did, it felt like a small victory. My ex-wife, on the other hand, seemed to fade into the background. We had minimal contact, mostly for legal matters. I didn't know how she could live with herself after what she'd done, and honestly, I didn't care. My focus was on my son and the life we were rebuilding together. Looking back, I wish I'd asked more questions, been more curious about the small things that didn't add up. But I also know that hindsight is cruel. The truth is, I trusted her because I loved her, and she used that trust against me. What I've learned is that trust can be shattered in an instant, but love, the kind of love that's built on years of shared experiences, is harder to break. My son and I are proof of that. The months after the truth came out were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The divorce process dragged on, each step feeling like a fresh reminder of the life I thought I had. My ex-wife and I barely spoke outside of what was necessary. Even then, every interaction was strained, filled with tension and resentment. Her betrayal wasn't something I could forgive, and honestly, I didn't want to. She had stolen 2 decades of my life, letting me build my world around a lie. Worse, she had robbed my son of the truth about his own identity. Every time I thought about it, the anger flared up again. How could someone live with themselves, carrying such a secret for so long? Despite everything, my relationship with my son became my anchor. I focused all my energy on rebuilding that bond, though it hadn't really broken. He was still my son. Nothing could change that. But there was a heaviness in the air between us now, an unspoken weight we both carried. As he prepared to leave for college, I found myself holding on tighter to the time we had left. I helped him pack, gave him advice, and made sure he knew how proud I was of him. But there were moments when I'd step out of the room just to gather myself, overwhelmed by the thought of him leaving. For years, I'd been his constant, and now, with everything that had happened, it felt like I was losing him in more ways than one. When he finally left, the silence in the house was deafening. The empty room seemed to echo with memories of his childhood. His laughter, his footsteps, his voice calling me Dad. Those memories felt bittersweet now. They were still beautiful, but they carried a sharp edge, reminding me of the truth I hadn't known back then. As I adjusted to life without him at home, I thought a lot about the past. I replayed moments over and over in my head, questioning everything. I thought about all the times I had looked at him and felt pride, all the times I'd seen pieces of myself in him. Had I been fooling myself? Or was that bond something deeper than biology? What became clear was that my love for him had never been about genetics. It was about the life we had shared, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the bedtime stories I'd read, the advice I'd given during tough times. Those moments were real, no matter what the DNA test said. At the same time, I couldn't stop grappling with the lies my ex-wife had told. Her betrayal haunted me. She had made a choice, a selfish, cowardly choice, to hide the truth and let me live in ignorance. That choice had stolen my agency, my ability to decide how I wanted to handle the situation. And now, even though the truth was out, the damage was done. When our divorce was finalized, I felt an odd mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that it was over, that I didn't have to keep facing her lies. Sorrow for the years I'd wasted with someone who could betray me so completely. Our marriage had been a sham, built on secrets and deception. But even as I grieved that loss, I held on to the one thing that was still real: my relationship with my son. He and I stayed in touch regularly after he left for college. His calls became the highlight of my week. He'd tell me about his classes, his new friends, and his plans for the future. Those conversations reminded me that, despite everything, I hadn't lost him. I was still his dad and he was still my son. But as much as we tried to move forward, the shadow of the truth lingered. There were questions neither of us knew how to answer. Did his biological father know he existed? Did my son want to meet him? Did I? The idea unsettled me. I'd been the one to raise him, to love him, to guide him. The thought of someone else stepping into that role, even symbolically, was hard to stomach. Over time, I began to accept that some questions might never be resolved. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo what had been done. All I could do was focus on the future and the bond my son and I still shared. That bond became my foundation. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is, but it was solid. We found ways to reconnect, to rebuild, and to move forward together. The love we shared had been tested, but it hadn't broken. If anything, it had grown stronger. Fatherhood, I realized, isn't about biology. It's about being there day after day through the good and the bad. It's about the memories you create, the sacrifices you make, and the love you give unconditionally. Those are the things that make someone a parent, not the results of a DNA test. As I look back now, I see the truth for what it is: devastating, yes, but not the end. My marriage may have been a lie, but my bond with my son is something real, something no one can ever take away. That, more than anything, is what matters. In the end, life didn't go back to the way it was. It couldn't. But it didn't completely fall apart either. My marriage was over, and the betrayal left scars I'll carry forever. But from the wreckage of those lies, something stronger emerged: the relationship I have with my son. We've learned to navigate the aftermath together, step by step. There are still moments of pain, flashes of doubt, and questions about what might have been. But there's also something undeniable: the bond we share, built on years of love and effort. That bond isn't just intact, it's unshakable. My ex-wife is a chapter I've closed. I don't know how she justifies her choices, and honestly, I don't need to. Her lies robbed me of the truth, but they didn't take away the father I became or the memories I've made with my son. For that, I'm grateful. If this experience has taught me anything, it's that fatherhood is defined by actions, not biology. Being a dad isn't about sharing DNA. It's about showing up, giving your time, and putting someone else's needs before your own. It's about love, pure and simple. For those of you going through something similar, know this: it's okay to feel broken. It's okay to grieve what you've lost. But don't let anger steal the good parts of your story. Hold on to the love that remains, because that's what truly matters. If you've connected with this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Life is messy and unpredictable, but together, we can face whatever comes next.